And the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple. And the sheep and the oxen poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said to them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my father's house a house of merchandise. John chapter 2, verses 13 and 16. So the author of this article I read writes that Jesus never acted out of violence, that this is the way people look at the story, but that he claims Jesus was never violent throughout the entire incident. He indicates that people think that Jesus went to a rage. He said he even heard a pastor on the radio say Jesus went into the temple and started throwing people around. And he says the Greek word for overthrew here in John is anastrephó, which simply means to turn over. That there's no indication that Jesus was throwing the tables or flipping them over in an out of control rage. It's also quite clear that nowhere is it mentioned that Jesus physically touched anyone with his hands, fists, or even with the whip. The crack of the whip was simply to alert the animals to flee. Jesus never harmed anyone. Jesus said, Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. In fact, 700 years earlier, the prophet Isaiah spoke of the coming Messiah, saying, He has done no violence, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 9. And so it says he wasn't dishonest or violent within this. And that it's paramount that the author feels for us to read this story in the context with his never-changing character of nonviolence from Hebrew chapter 13, verse 8. So anyone who thinks that Jesus is acting violently in the scripture is projecting their own internal violence or their own internal anger or onto Jesus, and that Jesus never acted this way throughout the entire episode. And he indicated, it says, Take note that only those with a self-condemning conscience were afraid and ran away. However, the dear little children who had witnessed the event were not afraid and began to sing praises to God, while the blind and lame stayed by and were healed. So he indicates, I just don't see it that Jesus was violent here. So I write in response, Jesus walks in, he tells them, Leave now. And they look at him and they think, Well, what authority do you have to make us leave here? Are you the high priest? And the answer would be no, as that was Joseph Caiaphas. Are you one of the chief priests? Again, no. Any level of recognized priests? No. Counselors or advisors of the high priest? No. Most of these positions were hereditary anyway, and Jesus was not one who was entitled to lineage to any of that. Are you a Levite? No. Are you a layperson being used as temple staff or property management? No. So other than saying that this is your father's house and you want us to leave, what is your authority to kick us out? Just the father thing? Okay. So now you have what looks like a whip in your hands. Are you planning to use that on us? Jesus replies, No. I'm as gentle as a child. I would never use violence. Okay. So I'm imagining them ignoring him at this point, right? And so, but Jesus cracks the whip to scare the animals. And so now the merchants are getting angry. Why are you scaring off my animals? The merchants are getting angry with Jesus, but he looks at them warmly and gently. Please leave my father's house. Eventually they might laugh and just go about their business. And then, he gently turns the table over, and the merchants look at him and they're getting angry. Out, out, Jesus says. The men are looking annoyed. He takes a bag from one of the bankers, one of the moneylenders, and he turns it over, letting the coins spill out. Now that banker is going to be saying, help, this guy's, taking my money, and he's pouring it out, and I feel like I'm being robbed, right? Because Jesus is messing with his money now, right? And then Jesus cracks the whip again, and some of the birds fly off, and some of the animals get scared. And merchants are now crying, Stop scaring our animals. Do you know how much money we're losing at this point? And I'm thinking that now all the merchants are looking at him like a person with mental illness. So I get it. He doesn't have to be in this rage, right? I get it that the person who wrote the article is trying to say, let's not project too much onto him. Let's not think that he basically just came in like some sort of mobster and just started breaking bones and throwing people across the floor and, flinging tables across the room, But, he's got a whip in his hand. I don't tend to think that that's a completely non-violent scenario there, right? Because we have different means of achieving violence, right? The first means would be assault, right? In other words, that you don't touch people, which would be battery, but you use either a show of force of your body or maybe cracking the whip in such a way as to imply to the victim that you intend to use some kind of harm on them in the immediate future. You might even swing and miss purposefully, and that kind of be a show of violence, right? You could also have yelling and threats, meaning you don't do anything physically, but you're just with your words, you're saying that you want to put them in fear, you want them to worry for their safety, and if they don't obey or move away from you, they're going to get hurt in the future. And then you have actual acts of violence, like striking someone, hitting someone with a battery. You can do it with your fist, your legs, your feet. You can do it with other parts of your body, bear hug, headbutt, etc. You can use an object to do it, throwing a rock, running into someone with a horse or a wagon, firing an arrow, using a lit oil or torch to set something ablaze, hitting with a weapon like a hammer or a sword. But in essence, this scene to me in the temple is one of trespass. And so, last time I checked, if you want to get someone who's trespassing off of your property, you're going to have to show a reason why they should be scared enough to comply and want to do it, right? I mean, sometimes they might. Sometimes they might just flee if they hear you coming. But then what about if they don't? And what if they think they're entitled to be there? Because remember, up to this point, the people that are running the temple aren't doing anything about it. So now what? You have to come with security, and maybe the security will scare the folks. But there's no mention here that Jesus had security with him. And supposedly, according to this author from this article, at best, all he's doing is cracking the whip to make a sound to scare the animals, which in of itself is a show of force as well, because if you're scaring the animals, using something that could do violence, that's assaulting the animals too. So, the bottom line being here is that I get it that he's not picking up merchants, throwing them. I get it, whatever. But there's got to be something, enough of a show of force, to at least make these people want to heed him or respect him, right? Because you want them to stop making money. You want them to abandon some of their goods and their money, right? Because apparently he had to scare up the animals. He had to throw coins out of the temple. I mean, last I checked, money is not cheap. So why would you leave your coins behind the temple if you're not running away so scared that you didn't even have time to pick it up? And so, unless he's using mind control or one of his miracles, I'm having a very hard time seeing that Jesus is never violent throughout this entire encounter. Because I don't know. Maybe someone can make it make sense to me, but I don't see the sense in it that he's clearly not happy that these people are in the temple. But according to the author of this article, he does all of this extremely gently and extremely dispassionately. Like, no, he's not showing any kind of anger or rage or anything. He just wants them to leave his father's temple. He's just following the rules. That his father's temple is being desecrated by the presence of these greedy capitalists that are doing business in his father's temple, right? But at the end of the day, we live in a modern society. There are people who are squatters in people's houses, and the person who owns the house may come by and they look at them and they don't open the door. They laugh at them and they don't want to leave because they're like, I've got a home now. I'll be homeless if I don't have someplace to stay. This place is great because I'm not paying rent. So what would be motivating enough for someone to just want to up and leave unless you either use some of your power, right? Because Jesus can do miracles. I'm sure miraculously he could make them all leave. He could just, do a thing, and in their minds they're hearing leave immediately. That's entirely possible. Whether or not that happened here, I don't know, because that's not in the biblical text. But I'm just saying, if Jesus did want to get them out of there in a way that's not violent, I could easily see that as a solution for that. But otherwise, if he's just acting as a regular person, he's not the high priest. He's not one of the priests. He's not one of the lower level clergy. It's not even a scribe or a young acolyte, and he's not part of the temple maintenance staff. He's not the guy going around sweeping up the temple or clearing out the dust with a duster. I mean, that's not his job. So he has no real affiliation to this temple other than the fact that he's the Son of God. And as we know from this time period, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily even believe he's the Son of God. There's some that will, because they will see him do the miracles. They'll see him bring people back from the dead. They'll see him heal the blind that they can see again. Those that are deaf, he can make them hear again. So, I mean, those folks may very well be convinced by his miracles to believe that, yes, this is the Son of God. But there's no record that these particular merchants, these money lenders, that they saw him doing any miracles, that they believe is the Son of God. So when he comes in saying, get out of my father's house, I'm thinking they're looking at him like, okay, is there something wrong? Did he fall on his head and bump his head a little bit? Why am I supposed to leave here? And so I'm not saying this because I want to, encourage this idea that Jesus is this most violent person, because we know from the Bible that he did try to avoid violent situations wherever possible, even when he's about to be crucified and the men are taking him to go before the Jewish leaders and then eventually before Pontius Pilate. At some point, Peter is not comfortable with the plan, so he takes out a sword and he cuts off the ears of one of the men, and so Jesus comes over and heals that, and he's telling Peter, I don't need you to do that, right? Because this is part of the plan all along. I've told you all along, I will be betrayed, I will be crucified. But Peter had that moment of weakness, which is why there's another point in the Bible where he says, Satan, get behind me, right? Because he sees that Satan fear element coming out in Peter, right? That Peter is ruining the plan slowly because he's not absolutely clear in his faith in Jesus that Jesus told him the crucifixion must happen. It's going to happen. That's it. It's a done deal. But it's good for everyone because his act of sacrifice will save the whole world. So I get it that Jesus is not the person who's going to run around and tell you, you know what, we need to start a bloody war, we need to do this, that's not Jesus. But I also think it's too extreme to put him on the other end of the scale, which is that, for example, you're a woman and your boyfriend is a domestic abuser. So every time you come home, his dinner's cold, smacks you across the face. So now, we're supposed to follow the Bible, which says turn the other cheek. So when your boyfriend slaps you across the face, that means you turn your other cheek and let him slap the other cheek as well. And you don't go to the police because, that would also be some sort of act of retaliation, right? He's telling you to go ahead and just be, submissive or whatever. That doesn't sound right to me, right? Like, in other words, I think what we've done as people is we have over-trivialized the importance of what Jesus meant when he talked about turning the other cheek. He's talking about the fact that, it's not necessarily that we should be rushing to war. It's not necessarily that we should be rushing to battle. It's not necessarily that we should go around and want to beat the crap out of everyone. Find diplomatic solutions. Try to work things out with people. I have no problem with that. But when you take it to the other end of the extreme, as some like to do, they want to turn Jesus into Mahatma Gandhi, where this is a act of absolute nonviolence that you will allow, let's say, like Martin Luther King in the Civil Rights Movement, you will allow the dogs to bite you, you will allow the police to turn their hoses on you, you will allow all this violence to be done, they'll kick your teeth in and throw you in a jail cell, and that's okay. And I'm just saying, let's not go overboard. Don't be a violent person. Don't be an angry person. Learn to forgive. Down with all of that. I'm just not down with the idea that we want to make Jesus into this figure that he never resorts to violence ever, ever. When we know in Revelation that he's coming back. And when he's coming back, it's not going to be good for the people that haven't gotten right with him or the Father. Okay? He's not going to be coming, talking about gentleness at that point. He will come with a sword, and those who are in the wrong are going to get it. Okay? So we have to be mindful of that context matters. Context absolutely matters. So let's not exaggerate things to their logical extremes to create some tortured logic that we have to constantly always be submissive. That's the same kind of logic that was used against the slaves during slavery, right? Hey, slaves, be obedient to your masters. God doesn't want you to fight back. Except for the fact that what if the slavery you're undergoing is not the right kind of slavery? See, one thing people have to be mindful of is when you hear stuff like that in the Bible, of talking about slaves be obedient to your masters, there are different kinds of slavery that are going on in the world at large, and that's something that is a context thing. Slavery during the time period of the Gospels is nothing like slavery that's going on in the Americas or through the Middle Passage. Completely different events, because there you have a totally unique form of slavery that was absolutely barbaric and brutal. You had chattel slavery. In other words, sometimes there are folks who become slaves because they indenture themselves to become slaves. They're like, I need money, I need property, I need things. And so there are some people who are willing to sell themselves into a slavery position, where they enter into a contract, they get a certain amount of compensation for that. However, that compensation plays out, whether it be through trade, through coins, money, whatever, that's one way to work it out. Indentured servitude is a thing. And then there are other forms of slaves where it's almost like a profession, but it's still not a lifetime profession. And that's where American slavery truly differed from other forms of slavery. There was always usually a way to buy yourself out of slavery. There's always usually a way for you to earn your freedom out of slavery. But that's not what was going on in the American system. The American system, they just simply reached a very point of greed where they just simply said, you're a slave, and your children will be slaves, and your children's children will be slaves, and none of you have an opportunity to buy yourselves out. And that's a problem. And that's why slavery became such a huge problem in the United States, because the United States turned it into a unique form of slavery that we really weren't seeing in other places. And so they went to the extreme, and so at some point, something had to give. Abolition had to come, because that's just creating an entire underclass of society of people who are just never, ever going to rise above their station. They're going to always be slaves, and their whole lineage will become slaves. And that's almost like a curse, right? They call that like a generational curse. And at some point, you have to stop that curse. So, no, I don't believe the Bible would be supportive of the idea that you can be in that kind of slavery and you never have to fight back. Absolutely not. No. Absolutely not. And so, we have to be mindful of a lot of things. Context absolutely matters. So let's not go overboard. Let's not turn Jesus into Mahatma Gandhi. Let's just recognize things for what they are, that there are going to be some times where if you feel like people are disrespecting your father's temple, you're going to need to eject them. And so when you're getting rid of a trespasser, it may get a little rough. And that's okay. And let's not dance around it. And let's not sugarcoat that. And let's not teach people to be docile to the point where they don't defend themselves. Absolutely. You better believe most people in the world believe in self-defense. And turning the other cheek goes against self-defense, then that means that God is asking you to allow yourself to be killed. And I don't think the Bible ever sent that message. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you're new here, this is a safe space. If you're returning, I love and appreciate you so much, and I'm glad that you're back. In the name of the Most High God, I wish you health, wealth, prosperity, and abundance. Blessings and protection. Signing off. Take care. Have a great day.